They say the Rebbe takes again. We're in Mamar Beyom Ashtei Asar, Shalom at Aleph. They're doing it, learning from the Sefer lessons in Maimorim, Hebrew English, and we are on page 216. A little bit further, maybe to 18. To 18. What? Want to say something? So the Rebbe asked a question here. First, we explained that those that are Kabul from Klippa do it because there's two advantages. One advantage is it doesn't require bittul, and the other advantage is that you get and what you receive is an abundance. Kedusha, number one, requires bittul, and number two, whatever you get is measured. The reason for this is because what you get from Kedusha, first of all, godliness, you have to be a keli, it's pneumius, you have to be a keli, and because you have to be a keli, therefore it has to be bittul, because the only thing that's a true keli for godliness is bittul. Again, quoting what it says in Tanya, that the only thing that's a vessel for godliness is bittul. But if someone would say, but Torah is a vessel for godliness, a shul is a vessel for godliness, a mitzvah is a vessel for godliness. The answer is all these things are vessels for godliness because they have bittul. They're all designed according to Hashem's will. So a person that is batel to Hashem is a keli. And the Torah and the mitzvah, these are different ways of how I can express my bittul. But everything, it's all about bittul. And then we can be a keli. On the other hand, klipa, you don't need to have bittul. And the second thing is that because the light of kedusha is given to us b'pnimius, it becomes part of us. Therefore, it's measured according to what I can take. In different words, we say what I deserve, but it really means what I'm capable of receiving. Thank you very much. What I'm capable of internalizing. In the other side, their chayes is not pnimis, it's makir. And therefore, because it's makir and they don't have to internalize it, it does not have to be measured according to their capacity. And therefore, even if they're not worth it, they can still get it. I want to give a little bit more explanation to this point, what that means. First, we'll thank Hashem for the water. Just a little bit in simpler words, what does it mean that what they get is b'chinas makif? One of the most basic principles of Chassidus is that everything in the world has a nitzah key, right? Even things that are trade, even things that are not kosher, even things that are pashut mamish evil. In fact, there's an entire chapter in Tanya in this fourth volume of Tanya, which is Igeres HaKodesh, chapter 25. That's the famous Igeres HaKodesh. The Alter Rebbe talks about anger, why anger is like worshiping idols. But there's more to that chapter. In fact, that chapter was written in reference to a big controversy that broke out then against Alter Rebbe and against Chassidim. And that was where it says in Chassidus that even in Klippa was a nitzah key. And therefore they came out how that's heresy. How could you say such a thing? It would be disgrace to say that Hashem is inside something which is evil. But again, based on Chassidus, there is no such thing in the world that can exist even for a moment without Hashem sustaining it. So what does that mean? It means that there is a godly spark. If a person, for example, does something which is evil, should be evil, a person, God forbid, commits murder, there had to be a chayes alaki, keeping this person alive, allowing this person to run and to do what he did, and allowing this person to, God forbid, murder someone else. Otherwise, he couldn't do it. So there's a chayes alaki. But when there's a nitzah alaki and something which is klipa, it's in it, but not in a way that it connects with it. When there's a nitzah alaki in a shofar, in matzah, in a sefer Torah, in tefillin, that defines what it really is. It becomes kedusha. When there's a nitzah alaki in something which is not a keli for it, even though it's there, but it doesn't connect to it. That's why we use the term makif. It's like from the outside. To give an example, this discussion came up the other day in the other class, where the famous Ramban, Rebbe also brings it in Sichas, and the Ramban says, he asked a question. In the Gemara, it talks about what would be the halacha of a person that his status changes regarding different issues of halacha. For example, before he was a minor, and now it became, I'll give an example. Let's say it's Sphira. So the first few weeks of Sphira, he didn't have to count Sphira. Then the second half, he's obligated to count, but he didn't count the first half. How does it work? And there are other halachas. There's a certain situation where in one part, he was a minor, and then he became an adult. What's the halacha? So whenever the Gemara talks about a person's status changes, the Gemara gives three possibilities. One is a child who became an adult, which means he became bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah. The other is an eved that became freed, his status changes. And the third is a ger who converted, his status changes. But the Maramban asks, when it comes to a child, it says, Katan shenes gadol, which means a minor that became an adult. When it comes to eved, it says eved shenes tacher, a slave that became free. When it comes to a ger, it should have said goy shenes gayer. Instead, it says ger shenes gayer, a convert that converted. But that's not the change of status. Before he wasn't Jewish, now he became Jewish. So Ramban says that even before he was Gayer, there's a neshama in him. And that the neshama is, nevertheless, it's not his soul. It's locked in him, but that's not his identity. His identity is not Jewish. But that's what's inside him that's driving him to become a Yid. And therefore, when he becomes a Yid, it's Ger Shenes Gayer. Someone who was already destined to become a Ger, they actually became a Ger. I'm just giving an example. Here's a neshama inside a person, but yet it's not really connected to him to the point that this is his identity. You follow? Because if it was, then halachically he'd be a Yid. The fact that halachically he's not a Yid means that it's there, but this is not him. There's even another example which is even more, shows more this idea. We know the idea of Gilgul. What does Gilgul mean? That the neshama of a person that lived many years ago comes down to become the neshama of a new person. And that could even be by tzaddikim. There's a story with the Rabbi Marash. He had a son, his name was Avram Sender. At the age of 7, he was brilliant. He was like a tzaddik. And unfortunately, something happened and he passed away. So the Rabbi Marash started blaming on something, why it happened. But the Tzemach Tzedek told him, no, that's not why it happened. His neshama was a gilgul, the neshama of the Alter Rebbe, and the neshama had to be here for another 7 years. So gilgul could be tzaddikim. Or the famous story in the Haggadah that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was 18 years old, was a gilgul of Shmuel HaNavi, who was 52 years old. That's why he said, I'm almost like 100 years old, right? You remember that? But there's another possibility, which is considered a punishment. If chas v'shalom, the neshama of a person comes down to this world, but inside, not a human being, but in an animal. That's called a gilgul, but that's a painful kind of gilgul. Why? Because when the neshama of a person is in a human being, even though it's a new person, but because it's a human body, the neshama can express itself. When the neshama of a person is in the body of a Baal Chai, of an animal, then the neshama is like constricted. It's like taking someone, tying him up in ropes and putting him in a sack. The neshama can't express itself. So even though there's a neshama of a human in a horse or a cow, it doesn't become the horse or cow's identity. I mean, there's a story of the Baal Shem Tov, that's an exceptional story. The Baal Shem Tov once took some of his students and he traveled to a field and he asked to speak to the farmer. And he said to the farmer, tell me, do you have people that owe you money? He said, yeah. You have a list? Yeah, I have the contracts. So can I look at it? And I was all surprised. Shem Tov comes to his house, wants to look at his contracts. So he takes out a bunch of sheets. Each one is another contract that he made with someone who he lent the money. And then he, as he's flipping through the pages, he sees a certain person, says, this person is still alive? Actually, no. And you expect to get paid somehow from him or his family? Nah, forget it. So what do you need it for? Why don't you just rip it up and cancel the debt? So okay, ripped it up, canceled the debt. 2 minutes later, someone comes running and says, the black horse just died. They had a horse, which is the horse was a horse that did work for 10 horses. And the horse died. So it looked like just a sudden tragedy. But Baal Shem Tov explained to him that the neshama of this person could not go into Gan Eden because he didn't pay back his debt. So his neshama had to come back in this Gilgul and work for him in that way, and by that paying back his debt, then he can go back to Gan Eden. So I came to help that neshama get out of the situation sooner. Again, so it could be a neshama of a person inside an animal, but that's not the identity. So that's the same thing with makif, that the godly light that's inside, inside those who are Avodah Zarah, that godly light is there, but it's makif. And that's why it doesn't have to be connected to their level. Like in this case, how could the neshama of a person be in an animal? The answer is because it's makif. It's not part of it. If it would have to become part of the body, like our neshama, then it couldn't be in the body of a horse. It could only be in the body of a human. But because it's there in a way that it doesn't connect to it, it's makif, it could be there. Follow? Explain a little bit better, understand a little bit better. Okay. And now then the Rebbe raised a question. And the question is, on the surface, it seems that the reason why the Chacham chooses the king over the other ministers is because they want to be connected to the king. But in the Medrash, where it brings this whole thing down, it says a different reason. It says because the others are replaced and the king is not replaced. So the Rebbe says, but Pashas, what does it mean? It means that whatever you get from Klippa is temporary. What you get from Kedusha is permanent. So therefore, they're saying to themselves, I'd rather get a little bit from Kedusha, which is temporary, which is permanent, than a lot from Klippa, which is permanent. So if a person has two options in business, one that he'll become a billionaire, but he'll only have the money for 3 years. After that, somehow it'll be gone. The other option is to become a millionaire and have it for the rest of his life. What would he choose? Of course. So that's a logical choice. On top of that, there's another cheshbon, and that is the fact that we have less now than Klippa is only now. But when Mashiach comes, we'll actually have infinitely more, even in quantity, than what they have. And the reason is, and the source for this is the Gemara with Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Akiva said, he was laughing because if those who violate your will could have so much, how much more so is destined for those that observe your will. That means that in the future we'll have you. How can we have more? Makif is more than Pnimius. The answer is because we also get from Makif, but we get from the Pnimius of Makif. But then the Rebbe says we're left with a question, and the question is that means that we choose Hashem because it's more beneficial for us. So we're really the same like the others who choose the ministers. They're choosing the ministers because it's more, they get more benefit. We're also saying that. The only difference is they're judging by now, right now, and now they'll get more from the ministers. And we're smarter. We look into the future and we say, in the future, we'll be getting more than them. So we're both on the same page. The only difference is we're judging by the future and they're judging by now. So the Rebbe is now going to answer that question. So where are we holding? So being that it says the words Chelki Avaya Omra Nafshi, which means the reason it's based on the pasuk Hashem is my portion, that implies that the reason why we choose Hashem is not because of any benefits, just because I and Hashem are one. He's my portion, and that's why I'm choosing him.
Which page?
So that's page 217. And we are by the paragraph. Let's start with the paragraph that says Avol, page 217. Avol, Mizeh Shem B'Medrash, and the fact that the Medrash says Zeh Yisrael Ein Oivdim El HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Reki Chelki Avaya Omra Nafshi, that the reason why you didn't choose Hashem is because they say Hashem is my portion. Muchach, from this it's obvious that Zeh Shapikach Beiche Ba'amel, the fact that the smart one, which represents Yidden, chooses the king over the ministers, is not because of the benefit that he'll get from this, but because this is the king, and I want to be connected to the king himself. Chelki Havaya, he's my portion. So that means the fact that you didn't choose HaKadosh Baruch Hu is even though now I see that those that violate his will, they actually get more in abundance. Page 218. So the reason why they choose Hashem is not because later we'll have more. But the reason is because the hashpah that Hashem is giving to those that follow his command, his wish, that comes from Pnimis Ritzonos Yisbarach, V'cheptzo Amiti. That's Hashem's Pnimius. And the hashpah that comes to those that worship idols or violate his will is commanded Shod B'Sakatve L'Seinei. It's like somebody throws it behind his shoulder to his enemy, Shaloi B'Ritzoinei. L'chein Reitzim Em Davke B'Hashpah L'Yisur Ritzoinei. That's why they want the hashpah to come from that place where Hashem gives to those who follow his will, not those who violate the will. Even though even though the hashpah is limited and measured, but it comes from the premiums. So again, if my interest is to connect to Hashem, that's what I want. I love Hashem and I want to embrace him. I want to be connected to him. My real connection to him is that I follow his will, because then what I get is panemius of Hashem's will. And what those who violate Hashem's will, they get from the chitzonius of Hashem's will, which is not really connecting to him. So we'll see soon in the terms. There are two terms. One is panemius haratzon, means the inner will. One is chitzonius haratzon, the external will. Does anyone ever remember having this anywhere else in a mimer or somewhere? What is the difference between the two wills?
I don't know which mimer, but we've talked about it before.
Right.
Even like bad things happening in the world, like that's coming from Hashem's like external world, like his panemius around his,
You remember any mushal?
It's like Hashem throwing it from his book like this.
Right. She's back.
Yeah.
They let her in. What could we do? The mashal is Rodan Chassidus. It's a classical mashal in many Maimarim, and that itself is precise why they choose this mashal. That if a person works, in fact, he works hard. I mean, I'm elaborating with these details, but it means, let's say a person has a job and he has to work physically very hard from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and he earns a living. Does he want to do this work or not? what would be the answer? If somebody would take away his job, would tell the boss, take it away from him and give it to me, would it be upset or would it be fine? He'd be upset. That means he wants it. If somebody would say to him, I'm offering you the same salary, but a much better job, less hours and a lighter job, just office work, would he give it up? So that means he doesn't want it. So does he want it or doesn't want it? And the answer is very simple. What he wants is the money that he's getting from the work. If I get that, in other words, the work, I want to work, but the work that I want to do is a means to an end. I don't want the work as an end in itself. I want the work because that's bringing me money, and that's the end. If I can get to that end without working hard, I'll take it. So in this case, the desire to do this work is a ratzon. If I'm doing it because I want to, that's called chitzonius haratzon. It's an external desire. I want this as a means to an end for something else. Pnimius haratzon means something that I want as an end in itself. So let's say if you ask a yid, okay, so you want the job because you want the money, and why do you want the money? The answer is because I don't need the money. I want to live comfortable. I want to have food, clothing, a shelter. I want to be able to provide for my family. I want to be able to give tzedakah, all these things. And what would be if you would have all these things without this job and earning this money? I'll be happy. I want to sell a sign somewhere. I don't need to be a millionaire. I just want to live like one. You know? If you can live like one without all the money, who cares? So I don't have to protect my money at the bank. So basically, so we say, no, the reason why I want the money is to live comfortable. And why do you want to live comfortable? So I could serve Hashem. So that becomes the chitzoni sarotzen and serving Hashem. That's the pnimi sarotzen. And why do you want to serve Hashem? Because I want to get schar, I want to get reward in this world and other mabah. So that becomes the chitzoni sarotzen. And then if you go a step further, and why do you want that? Oh, because I want godliness. Oh, that's the pnimi sarotzen. So when you say inner desire, external desire, there are actually many layers to that. But the principle is, if one thing is a means to an end for something else, that means I don't want it internally, it's an external desire. I only want it as to get to another place. So Hashem gives, I'm going to get to a second, Hashem gives chayus to a rasha, to a real evil person. If he's giving him, obviously he wants to, otherwise no one could force Hashem to do it. But that desire, or that will to give him is not chazon because he wants to give chayas to evil, is because of some other end that's going to come out of it, bechira or darkness, light coming out of darkness, whatever it is. But this is not the end in itself. Yeah.
Isn't Tanya that they call when Hashem gives like bias the clip or something, like the backhand?
Right. So this is the other mashal which Amy mentioned. That's like a person throwing something behind his back. Somebody says here, throwing something behind his shoulder. That's also the expression that's used. What does it mean? Because in the Torah, we find places where it says, Hashem, show me your face. In more than one place. In davening, we have it. Ba'or panecha, the light of your face. What do you mean face? Hashem doesn't have a face. But it means, just like begashmis, if you have a relationship with somebody that you care for, that you enjoy, you face them. If there's somebody that you don't like, you don't face them. You don't even look into their eyes. You look away, or you turn your back on them. So imagine if you have to give somebody something which you really don't want to, but for whatever reason you have no choice. So the mashal is that you turn your back on them, but you give it to them. So who wants that kind of, you don't want it. But it depends what. If it's all about money, I don't care how I get it. Back, face, sideways, upside down, just give me my $1,000. But if it's about a relationship, you don't want that the person that you love should turn his back on you. So therefore, when we get hashpah from Hashem, it's from the pnimius of the ratzon. If we would get a lot, but it would be from chitzonius haratzon, that's not Hashem. That means it's Hashem in hiding, Hashem disconnecting and turning his back on me. That I don't want. So that's the deeper reason why it says that we choose Hashem over the ministers, because the ministers is klipa, they get from chitzonius haratzon. And chelki avaya amar nafshi, I want Hashem. And where do I have Hashem? And those things that he really wants, which is Torah mitzvahs. This understood? But we're still left with the question. In the Medrash, it gives a different reason. It says, of course, everything is temporary and this is permanent. What do we do with that? So here the Rebbe explains that. Page 219. So based on this, when it says everything is replaced, but the king himself is not replaced, the intent of these words is as follows. From the fact that they could be replaced later, which means this minister could become no longer a minister and someone else will be put in his place, and that minister could become no longer a minister. That's an indication. Shagam achshav eina metzias hamiti. In other words, it's not about the future. The fact that in the future Klippa will be disappearing, that's an indication that even now they're not a true metzias, they're not emes. We know this rule. We also know it from other places that anything that has no permanency, that means it's not emes. Like my favorite mashal, if there's a piece of paper flying in the wind, next time you walk outside and see paper flying in the wind, you'll think of the mimer. A piece of paper flying in the wind. So if someone asks, is it true that the paper is flying in the wind? It's true, but it's not really true. How do I know it's not really true? Why is it not true? Because the paper is not flying in its own merit. The wind is moving and the paper is just being carried by the wind. But how could you prove that? The proof is because when the wind is going to stop, the paper falls down. If it would be a bird, even after the wind stops, the bird continues to fly because the bird is flying in its own merit. And the paper is not really flying, it's stationary, and it's the wind that's moving. So from the fact that later it'll be discontinued, that proves that now it's not emes. Anything which is temporary is not emes. Anything which is permanent, that's emes. So that's what it means. They'll be replaced, but not the king. So it's just that's the reason that we're saying, but in different words, that I want Hashem because he's emes and everything else is not his pnimius. Even though Klippa has so much vitality, Klippa gives chayis, like it says in Tanya, to all creation, so many creation in the world. The animal kingdom gets from chayis, and all those other nations get chayis from Klippa. So they have so much chayis. How can you tell me it's not emes? Because their chayis, they don't have in their own merit chas v'shalom. Klippa have no independent power to do anything. The reason why Klippa has chayis because they derive their vitality from Kedusha. The cave and chayis the Kedusha. Being that the chayis of Kedusha doesn't become one with them. Kedusha is giving it chayis, but the chayis of Kedusha is not connected to them. Like the mashal I gave before, the neshama inside an animal, for example, is there, but it doesn't connect. It doesn't become part of it. Adrabah, b'chinas golus, that's considered a golus. That means that in essence, just like the piece of paper, in essence, is stationary. In essence, Klippa has no life. And whatever life you see there is not coming from Klippa, it's from something else that's giving Klippa the life. The same applies to all those that get chayis from them. Like it says in Tanya, when it says shoyim b'chayim kurim mesim, shoyim even during their lifetime are considered that. This is what it says: the difference between tzaddikim and rishoyim. Tzaddikim even after their passing are considered alive, and rishoyim even when they're alive they're considered dead. Because their chayis comes from Klippa. Klippa is something which is impure, and it's also something which is dead. What do you mean dead? Because Klippa has no chayis in its own right. The chayis it has comes from someplace else, from Kedusha. And it doesn't become part of the Klippa to say, oh, now Klippa has chayis on its own. No, it's just like the wind in a piece of paper. It's something outside of Klippa that's giving it chayis. And that's what it means. I choose the king, mishum the kulim ischalpim, because everything else is not permanent. Which means she'einer doitze b'ashposh and nimshech mimokim amovez ba'atuma. He doesn't want hashpah that comes from a place which is the opposite of light and a place which is impure. And how do we know that? Because it's discontinued. Even though it's a lot of hashpah, that doesn't excite me. Right? So dafka, I only want hashpah from kedusha. Imayes hashpah mitzvah. And now we understand even more why it's considered pika, why the person is considered smart, because he's giving up a lot. He's giving up a tremendous amount of abundance of sort of good things that are happening to him. But he says, if it's coming from klipa, I don't want it. In other words, when we say that if you're going to work on Shabbos, and let's say you know for sure that by working on Shabbos, you'll be earning thousands and thousands of dollars more every week. And the person says, I don't want to have money that I get from violating Shabbos, because ultimately, like the story of the person that someone came sick and he had money, ultimately it won't bring bracha. That's one level. It's also a true level, but it's one level saying, I'm not working Shabbos because I see that what I'm going to get is me temporary. But the real reason is I don't want to get chayas from klipa. If a person works on Shabbos and they get chayas, they get money or whatever they get, that means the chayas, that means klipa is providing them with chayas. I don't want chayas from klipa, I want chayas from kedusha. Yeah.
I got a little confused about the part with like said in English, like the stars and constellations.
You're very fortunate. Only a little confused. Very good.
Maybe more than one.
Okay.
It says that they have the vitality that they can convey life force to the like animals, nature of the world, and that's like from klipa. But I was under the impression that the way that like Hashem sends Hashpah to the world is like through these like channels of like the constellations and stars, and that's why like all the nations of the world worship them at a certain point, because like there really was like Hashem's Hashpah coming through them. But it's saying that when it comes through there, that's klipa, like always. So how does Hashem send, like, I thought it went through that channel anyways, even Kedusha or Klipa, like that was just how Hashem sent it into the world, but is that not the case?
Which channels?
Like through the constellations and stars, and that's why the nations like saw them as having power, because they did have like highest from Hashem, they did have like power, but not on their own power, obviously, but.
Right.
So is it just Klipa comes through there, like all the highest of Klipa comes through there, or?
In other words, the highest comes through there, but the fact that this highest is connected to Hashem, that becomes concealed. It's like filtered. That part doesn't come out.
Concealed how? And because it goes through this extra.
That's why they can give highest to Klippa, because Klippa means something which conceals godliness. And let's say the highest that's giving highest to an animal which is not kosher. So it means that it's klippa, but it's getting chayis from Hashem. But because it goes through these channels, the chayis from Hashem becomes concealed.
Okay.
And then those things which are not klippa, the chayis from Hashem is not so concealed, even though it's going through the channels, but it's still more open.
It'll go through the same channels like Kedusha and Klipa?
No, it's probably, which means let's say the nature. We live in a world where there's nature. But our neshama gets chayis from, let's say, Shem Havaya, which is really not so much channeled through nature. Even if it goes through the channel, but it's not. Okay, let me introduce another idea. We have 5 minutes, we'll try. Have you ever come across the idea of, in language of Chassidus, it's called derech ma'ivir or derech hislapshus? No. Okay, let's start. We'll continue tomorrow, but it's to answer your question. What is the difference between the neshama of Avraham Avinu, let's say, and the neshama of someone in our generation? What is the difference? Where does their neshama come from? Where does our neshama come from?
Atzilus versus Asiya.
Right, very good. Their neshama comes from Atzilus. Our neshama comes from Asiya. So our neshama has no roots in Atzilus.
No, it does also.
It does.
Oh, it's like an elevator that like, I heard a mashal like an elevator that stops on every floor is like our neshamas, but then like their neshamas just like go straight down.
That's a good mashal. Their neshamas take the express. So we use a train. They take the express and they come straight from Atzilus down. Our neshamas come from Atzilus, but they stop on every floor. But what does that mean? A little bit more explanation. It means like this: when you go somewhere, there can be two possibilities. Let's say you will now travel for Pesach to Eretz Yisrael. Do you keep 1 day? Do you keep 2 days? If a family goes there for Pesach, do they keep 1 day or 2 days? So there are different opinions, Allah, but what does it depend on? What's the difference? Or somebody goes to Israel to live there, but he already got there this month, or he's only there 2 months. Does it keep 2 days or 1 day? Yeah. What?
Your intention.
Right. And what's the difference? If your intention is to settle there, to be there permanently, then you take on the halachas of the place. If your intention is just visiting, even though you're there, but nevertheless, you don't take on the halachas and the customs of that place. You're not obligated to follow that. You go by where you came from. Why? Because even though you're there physically, but you're not part of it. You didn't become part of the community of Eretz Yisrael. You still belong where you came from because you're planning to go back. But if you plan to stay, you have become part of that community. Which means there's 2 ways to go somewhere. One way that you're just passing by, and therefore you don't become part of that place. And the other is that you come there and you actually become part of it. These are the 2 words. Maybe I should put them on the board. Not enough time. We'll do it tomorrow, and could be there in the terms here. Derech maiver. The word maiver means la'avor, to pass by. So the neshama, our neshama. Let's start with Avraham Avinu. His neshama comes from Atzilus. It has to go through B. There's no way to go from the 4th floor to the 1st floor without passing all the 3 floors. But his neshama just passes through, which means it doesn't change as it goes through the different worlds. It maintains its original level of Atzilus. That's when it goes to Bria, and when it goes to Yitzira, and it goes to Asiya, wherever it goes. So it's like a Yid who's traveling, and he goes to Egypt, and he goes to Syria, and he goes to another community. Here's an Ashkenazi community, a Sephardic community. He doesn't take on the customs of every place that he's traveling, because he's only a traveler, he's passing by. So he maintains his status from where he came from. What about a person that goes to a different country to settle there? If it's more than 10 months, 12 months, that's considered settling. He takes on the customs of that place. I mean, to a certain extent, but generally speaking, he's considered part of that community. Then he goes to another place, and that's what happens to our neshamas. We go from Atzilus to Bria, our neshama changes completely, radically. It becomes a Bria neshama. It's no longer what it was in Atzilus. There's certainly a certain element of Atzilus left in us, but generally speaking, it becomes an neshama of Bria. And then it goes to the next world, Yitzira, it's another change. And Asiya is another change. And in Asiya itself, Chochmah, Bina, Das, every level it goes through is change. Avraham Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, the tzaddikim, like the Rebbe, and these tzaddikim, their neshamas go straight. Straight means they pass those levels, but not in a way that they conform to that level, become part of it. So therefore, even though we can say that Kedusha goes through the same channels, but it goes through a way that the channels don't really affect and change it. And there's another way that they really get changed by those channels, and there's a much stronger concealment. I'm going to take a peek if it came up when I did this Maimel. If we have it here. I don't remember putting it in. You never know. No, I know where I put it in. I put it in the questions on Tanya, because this comes up in Tanya right away when the Alter Rebbe speaks about neshamas. They're higher and lower neshamas. So that's the way you have to explain it. How could one be higher and lower? They all come from the same place, from Chochmah of Atzilus. The answer, they come from the same place, but they go through different processes to get down here. Either that's what's the word? Hislapshus. Levush means to clothe yourself, means you get dressed into it, you become part of it. And therefore every stage is becoming part of something lower and lower and lower, and everything changes completely.
So then the Kedusha that comes down to the world just passes through the constellations.
Right. So let's say if we say that in the Beis Hamikdash, it was Chochmah Vatzilus in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But how did it get here? The answer, it got here, but it didn't change as it got here. It maintained its original identity. Okay, we'll stop here. So we finished, right? We finished Ois Hey, and we'll do the review tomorrow and move on to Ois. So tomorrow is a fast day. Just reminding everybody, if you don't fast good, you get dizzy, you don't feel well, please don't fast.
We
Yeah,
have to
that's-
try it first and then do it.
No. I mean, you should know basically what you can handle.
How do we move this fast and when?
So you break the fast, usually with Kiddush. And the shuls are gonna daven as early as possible, so we can all make Kiddush before 6 o'clock. Break the fast as soon as we come home from shul.
So the Kiddush on.
Friday night, yeah.
So we fast on Shabbos still.
Technically, we're fasting, yeah.
When's the earliest you can make Kiddush?
Yeah, probably. I know there must be the times are on the calendar usually. It probably says when the fast ends on the calendar, that's when you can make Kiddush. Most calendars will have when does the fast end. Also, as when it begins. Some of you who are up all night, you can have something early, and some of you get up early, so you can have it. I don't know, maybe 5 o'clock even. You have to take a look on the calendar. You usually have a time when the fast. This is the shortest fast of the year in America, and the longest fast of the year in Australia. Upside down.
Questions on Tanya, you have to. Booklet or something?
Yeah.
Is it like, well, first Tanya, like all.
It's one of the projects we give girls who want to do a project. They answer the question of Tanya. You want to do it to test your knowledge?
Yeah.
Did you not see me run with it last year?
Oh, yeah, maybe.
I'm not going downstairs now, but I have a booklet.